Imagine you are sitting in a truck cab, 80,000 pounds of steel, fuel, and cargo pushing you down a highway at 70 miles per hour. A car cuts in front of you. You hit the brakes. And in that exact moment, everything comes down to one question. How fast can this thing actually stop? Now here is the part that might surprise you. The technology responsible for stopping that truck in America is fundamentally the same technology that was being used decades ago. While Europe looked at that same problem and said, "We can do better," America largely said, "No thanks, we are good." So why is that? What does Europe know that America does not? Or is it actually more complicated than that? Hi, my name is Jeremy, and this is Trucks United, the channel where we get into the real reasons behind how trucks are built, how they work, and why decisions that seem simple on the surface almost always have a story behind them that nobody is talking about. What are drum brakes and how do they work? Before we can talk about why America stuck with drum brakes, we need to make sure we actually understand what a drum brake is and what it does, because it is a bit more involved than what you might find on your passenger car. On a heavy truck, drum brakes work through an air-powered system rather than the hydraulic system you would find on a regular vehicle. When the driver pushes the brake pedal, air pressure is sent through the brake lines to a component called the brake chamber. Inside that chamber, the air pushes against a diaphragm which moves a rod called the push rod. That push rod turns a mechanism called the slack adjuster, which then rotates the S-cam. And this is the important part. The S-cam pushes two curved brake shoes outward against the inside of a large metal drum that rotates with the wheel. The friction between those shoes, and the drum, is what slows the truck down. Now that might sound fairly straightforward, and in many ways it is. The design has been around for a very long time, and that is actually part of the point. These things are robust. They are relatively simple to understand. Most truck mechanics across America know exactly how to work on them, and the parts are cheap and widely available. Walk into almost any truck stop across the country and you will find drum brake components on the shelf. That matters more than people give it credit for. The drum itself also acts as a kind of protective housing. The braking components are enclosed inside that drum, which gives them some natural protection from road debris, water, and dirt. In theory, at least. We will come back to that. But the drum brake design also has some real limitations, especially when you push it hard. And understanding those limitations is exactly what drove Europe to start looking for something better. What are disc brakes and how do they work? Air disc brakes work on a fundamentally different principle. Instead of pushing shoes outward against the inside of a drum, disc brakes use a caliper to squeeze brake pads against both sides of a flat rotating disc, called a rotor, that spins with the wheel. The air system works in a similar way to drum brakes, using chambers and push rods to generate the clamping force, but the actual braking action is completely different. The big advantage here is heat management. When you brake hard and repeatedly, think mountain descent, stop and go city traffic, or emergency stops at highway speed, brakes generate an enormous amount of heat. Drum brakes trap that heat inside the drum. The drum heats up, the shoes heat up, and once everything gets hot enough, the friction coefficient drops. This is what is called brake fade. And on a fully loaded semi-truck weighing 80,000 pounds, brake fade is not just an inconvenience. It is genuinely dangerous. In contrast, disc brakes have the rotor exposed to the open air, so the heat dissipates much more quickly and consistently. The pads also make more uniform contact with the rotor surface compared to shoes pressing against the inside of a drum, which means more consistent and predictable braking performance. There is also a significant advantage in wet conditions. When a drum gets wet, there can be a brief moment of reduced braking performance until the water is cleared. Disc brakes, because the rotor is exposed and the pads wipe across the surface with every rotation, shed water almost immediately. Stopping distances are shorter. Brake fade is dramatically reduced. Wet weather performance is better. So the obvious question is, if disc brakes are genuinely superior in these ways, Why is America still fitting drums to the majority of its heavy trucks? And the answer, as always with trucking, starts with history. The history. How America ended up with drums. To understand why America is where it is today with drum brakes, you have to go back to the mid-20th century when the modern trucking industry was really taking shape. By the 1950s and the 1960s, the American trucking industry was growing at a massive rate. The interstate highway system was being built. Long-haul freight was becoming the backbone of the economy, and truck manufacturers needed reliable, proven technology that could handle the demands of cross-country hauling. Drum brakes were that technology. They were well understood, they were manufacturable at scale, and the supply chain for parts and repair was already established coast to coast. By the time the 1970s arrived, drum brakes were not just common on American trucks. They were the standard. They were baked into regulations, baked into training programs, baked into the design of trailers, baked into the business models of fleet operators. When something gets that deeply embedded into an entire industry, changing it is not just a technical decision, it is an economic and political one. Now here is an interesting thing. Air disc brakes for heavy trucks were not some invention that nobody knew about. European manufacturers and suppliers were developing and refining heavy-duty disc brake systems through the 1980s and into the 1990s. The technology existed. It was available. American manufacturers and fleet operators were aware of it. But the incentive to change simply was not strong enough. The regulations did not require it. The customers were not demanding it. And the cost of switching, retrofitting fleets, retraining mechanics, rebuilding supply chains was significant. So America kept its drum brakes. And meanwhile, across the Atlantic, something very different was happening. Why Europe made the switch? Europe did not switch to disc brakes on heavy trucks because European engineers woke up one morning feeling ambitious. They switched because regulation pushed them there, and because the operating environment in Europe made the limitations of drum brakes harder to ignore. European roads, as we have talked about on this channel before, are fundamentally different from American interstates. They are narrower, more winding, and they include a much higher density of urban environments where trucks are stopping and starting constantly. They also include some serious mountain routes, the Alps and the Pyrenees, where a fully loaded truck might be descending steep grades for extended periods. In those conditions, brake fade is not a theoretical problem. It is a real and immediate danger. European regulators started tightening brake performance requirements through the 1990s, and by the early 2000s, ECE regulations, the Economic Commission for Europe, were setting stopping distance requirements that drum brakes on heavy trucks were increasingly struggling to meet. Manufacturers like Volvo, DEF, Mercedes-Benz, Scania, and MAN responded by moving to air disc brakes across their heavy truck ranges. By the mid-2000s, disc brakes were essentially the default on new heavy trucks sold in Europe. And I want to be clear about what that means. It was not just a technology preference. It was a regulatory and market reality. If you wanted to sell a truck in Europe, it needed to stop within a certain distance under certain conditions. Disc brakes made that easier to achieve and demonstrate. There is also a culture difference worth mentioning here. European operators, partly because of the density of their road networks and partly because of regulatory pressure, tend to have a higher focus on active safety technology. Disc brakes fitted naturally alongside other systems like ABS and electronic stability control because all of those systems depend on consistent, predictable braking response. Drum brakes, with their tendency toward fade under sustained heavy use, are simply less compatible with sophisticated electronic safety systems. The real reasons America hasn't switched. All right, so we know disc brakes are better in several important ways. We know Europe has been running them for decades. So what is actually keeping America on drums? I promise you, it is not that American engineers do not know how disc brakes work. The reasons are more complicated and, honestly, more interesting than that. The first reason is cost. And I do not mean the cost of one truck. I mean the cost of an entire industry. There are hundreds of thousands of heavy trucks operating in the United States at any given time. A large portion of those are operated by fleets, companies running anywhere from a dozen trucks to several thousand. Switching from drum to disc brakes on a trailer is not just the cost of the parts. It is the cost of retooling maintenance facilities, purchasing new diagnostic equipment, retraining every mechanic, and rebuilding parts inventory. When you multiply that across a major fleet operation, the numbers become very significant very quickly. The second reason is that the existing regulations simply did not force the change. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, FMCSA, sets the braking standards for commercial trucks in the United States. For a long time, those standards could be met on paper with properly maintained drum brakes. So fleet operators did not have a regulatory gun to their head, and without that pressure, the financial case for switching was weak. Third, and this does not get talked about enough, is the parts and service infrastructure. America is a big country. A very big country. One of the things that makes drum brakes genuinely practical in the American context is that you can break down in the middle of nowhere in Wyoming or West Texas or rural Mississippi. And there is a reasonable chance that a nearby truck stop or repair shop has the parts to get you back on the road. That nationwide parts availability for drum brakes is the result of decades of investment and standardization. Disc brake parts availability, while improving, is simply not at the same level across the whole country yet. Fourth, and look, I am just going to say it, lobbying and industry influence have played a role here. The trucking industry in America is enormously powerful politically. When regulations are proposed that would require significant fleet upgrades, there is considerable organized resistance. That is not a conspiracy theory. It is how large industries operate when faced with mandatory cost increases. The same thing happened with emissions regulations, with electronic logging devices, with speed limiters. Change is slow when the people who have to pay for it have a seat at the regulatory table. And fifth, there is operator preference. American truck drivers and fleet managers have decades of experience with drum brakes. They know how to inspect them, adjust them, and diagnose problems with them. There is a real and legitimate value in familiarity. Switching to a technology that your workforce does not yet fully understand introduces its own set of risks, at least in the short term. None of these reasons mean drum brakes are better. They just explain why change in a massive, deeply interconnected industry is never as simple as it looks from the outside. Performance comparison: drums versus discs on heavy trucks. Let us get into the actual numbers and real-world performance differences, because this is where things get very clear very quickly. Stopping distance is the most important metric, and the difference is significant. Studies and testing data from organizations including the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety have shown that trucks equipped with air disc brakes can stop in notably shorter distances compared to equivalent trucks with drum brakes, particularly from highway speeds. Some tests have shown stopping distance improvements of 30% or more under certain conditions. On a truck doing 70 miles per hour with 80,000 pounds behind it, 30% shorter stopping distance is not a small thing. That is the difference between a near miss and a catastrophic collision. Brake fade under sustained high heat is where the gap becomes most dramatic. On a long mountain descent, a drum brake system that starts the descent in good condition can lose significant braking effectiveness as the drums heat up beyond their optimal operating range. Disc brakes maintain far more consistent performance through those same conditions, because the rotor is cooling continuously and the pad contact is more uniform. In wet weather, disc brakes have a clear advantage. The exposed rotor and continuous pad sweep means wet braking response is almost immediate. Drum brakes can take longer to clear water from the braking surface, which creates a moment of reduced response that in a heavy vehicle situation can be genuinely dangerous. Maintenance is more nuanced. Drum brakes are cheaper to maintain in terms of parts cost and require less specialized knowledge. Disc brake pads are generally easier to inspect visually. You can see the pad thickness without disassembling much, but the rotors and calipers are more expensive components when they do need replacing. Over a full service life, the total maintenance cost difference between drum and disc is a genuine debate, and it depends heavily on operating conditions and how diligently maintenance is performed. One honest point in favor of drums is that in very dusty, dirty, or abrasive environments, the enclosed design can actually extend the life of the friction material compared to exposed disc brake pads. For certain off-road or construction applications, this is a legitimate consideration. But for highway use, for emergency stops, for mountain roads, and for integration with modern electronic safety systems, disc brakes win. It is not really a close argument on the performance side. Is change coming? The future of American truck brakes. Here is where things start to get interesting, because while America has been slow to move, there are signs that the drum brake era in American trucking may finally be approaching its end. Slowly, very slowly, but moving. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration has been under increasing pressure to update stopping distance requirements for heavy trucks in the United States. Back in 2011, new rules were introduced that required significantly shorter stopping distances for certain truck configurations. Those rules were a step in the right direction, and disc brake adoption did increase following that regulation. But critics argued the new requirements still did not go far enough to fully mandate the performance advantages that disc brakes offer. As of the early 2020s, disc brake adoption on new heavy trucks in America has been growing. Freightliner, Kenworth, Peterbilt, and Volvo trucks sold in the American market are increasingly being specified with disc brakes, particularly on steer axles. Some fleets, especially those operating in mountainous regions or with safety-focused policies, have been specifying discs across all axles, but it is still far from universal. Now here is the thing that might actually push America over the finish line faster than any regulation. Electric trucks. Companies like Tesla with the Semi, Freightliner with the e-Cascadia, and Kenworth with the T680E are bringing electric heavy trucks into real commercial operation. Electric trucks change the braking equation in a fundamental way. Regenerative braking, where the electric motors slow the vehicle by converting kinetic energy back into electricity, dramatically reduces the load on the mechanical brakes. But when mechanical brakes are needed, especially in emergency situations, disc brakes are far better suited to work alongside the sophisticated electronic systems that manage regenerative braking. You simply cannot integrate drum brakes as cleanly into those systems. So, ironically, it may be the electric revolution that finally puts drum brakes to rest in America. Not a safety regulation, not a consumer campaign. Instead, battery packs and regenerative braking may force the issue by making disc brakes the only sensible engineering choice. We will see, but do not expect it to happen overnight. This is the trucking industry. Nothing happens overnight. So there you have it. The reason American trucks are still running drum brakes while Europe moved on decades ago is not because Americans do not know better. It is because an entire industry built its infrastructure, its supply chains, its workforce skills, and its regulatory framework around drum brake technology over the course of more than half a century. Changing that is not a technical problem. It is an economic, political, and logistical one. Europe changed because regulation forced it to change, and because the operating environment made the weaknesses of drum brakes impossible to ignore. America has been slower because the regulations permitted it. The cost of switching was enormous, and the parts infrastructure for drums is deeply embedded from coast to coast. But change is coming. Slowly, grudgingly, the way change always comes in heavy industry. And when electric trucks finally become the mainstream in American long-haul transport, which will happen, even if it takes longer than the optimists predict, drum brakes will likely go with them. That is everything for today. Do you think America should have made the switch to disc brakes sooner? Or do you think the critics of drum brakes are overstating the problem? Drop your opinion in the comments below. I read every single one of them, and some of you leave comments that honestly know more about this stuff than I do, which I appreciate more than you know. Thanks for watching Trucks United, and remember to subscribe for much more.